founding fathers, take a look around. Is trouble coming? Are we going down? Mother, daughter, and your brother too. Get your mind straight when it's up to you. Hey, you gotta see the storm a-coming. Hey, you gotta feel it coming through. Hey, you gotta see the storm a-coming. Whoa, it's coming after you.
Okay, my name is Greg Seagroves. I'm the host of this podcast, and the name of this podcast is Reflections of an Uncommon Common Man. And the reason I name it that is because I take pride in being of the common stock. I'm self-educated. I kind of in a distinguished group, Abraham Lincoln and Harry Truman and people like that. I'm not comparing myself to them, but they were self-educated men. And I'm here with four distinguished people. My grandson, who is the one that's put this podcast together. It wouldn't be possible without him.
Howdy.
He's Connor. He just said hi to you there. And then I have a great friend of mine. I've worked with him the last few years in mall security, which I'm a site supervisor at Stones River Mall or Stones River Town Center in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. But he's been a great friend. His name is Jimmy Catrone. Jimmy, say hi to him.
Hey, how are you, folks?
And then our special guest is we call him Pete, but his full name in German, I think, is Hans Dieter Jentzsch, right? Is that right? Just say hi to everybody there.
That's correct. Hans Dieter Christian Jentzsch. Hi,
All right.
everybody.
It's very German.
Very German, yeah. But anyway, what we want to try to achieve by this podcast is I want to interview people like Pete, who has a very interesting past. I'm a big believer that everybody has a story to tell. Some stories are a little more interesting than others. And Pete has a heck of a story to tell. I would like to, I've tried to contact movie producers to try to get his story done in Hollywood, but haven't been successful at that yet. I've got a friend who is a script writer he said he would love to put his story down in a screenplay, but we haven't got to that part yet. But anyway, Pete, I want to thank you for coming and being helping us out here. First of all, let me ask you, where were you born in Germany?
Well, Greg, thank you for calling me over here for this good invite. And I was born in Glauchau, Germany. That's Saxony. December 10, 1936.
Now, let me ask you something. I know that your mother, for whatever reason, she said she took 4 years off your life, okay? She said you were born, what was it, December the 15th? Or did I hear that wrong?
No, actually, well, it wasn't 4 years. It was almost 4 years.
Okay.
She made me younger than what I am.
Well, that's what I mean. She said you were born in December of 1940 rather than December of 1936.
Right.
Okay. Do you know why she did that?
No other reason than the fact that she may have been affected by the war. Excuse me. Or maybe some technicalities. I have no idea.
Right.
And so it wasn't until later, after I got to the States,
Right.
that I found out, well, from my birth certificate and everything. And that I
But
was a
you
little
didn't
bit
find
older.
out your real age to what, the 80s?
Yes.
1980s.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Could that have been anything to do with you putting you into the workforce or anything like that to avoid, being younger, not having to go in and do anything or to
Well,
serve anything?
That may have been because back then they took people, or the youth, that they called it Hitler Youth.
Mm-hmm.
And actually what it was, they took kids, I think, 12 years old in the beginning and on up, and then later on a lot earlier. And they actually just, they trained them for the military.
Right.
And it's the Hitler Youth is like our Boy Scouts. And matter of fact, I was accosted by some of them. I was about maybe 6 or 7 years old. And this was, 1942. It would have been around there, or 43. And I found one of their knives. They have really nice daggers. That's what it was. And they had a sheath, and it was decorated really nice. And I found it on the street, and I took it home, and I played with it and everything like that. And there was a bunch of them coming by, well, from down the street. They were walking, and they saw it on me. And being that I wasn't a member of the Hitler Youth, well, they took it away from me, and they beat me up. And so I didn't know why they did it. So later on in life, I thought it was just, that's what kids do. You just a fight,
Right,
throw
right.
rocks at each other, and of course they hurt me pretty bad.
yeah.
And so that could have been a good reason,
What?
because I was small.
When was your what was your mom's name and when was she born?
Now, Mom, let's see, her name was Gertrude Dole Jentzsch. No, Dole was her last name.
Okay.
And then her married name was Jentzsch. And she was born March 1917.
Okay. And
And-
your father, what was his name and when was he born?
Now, his name was Emil Fritz
Okay.
Jentzsch.
Were they
And he was-
both from the same town you were born
In
in?
the same area. It was Saxonia.
Yeah.
Saxon, they
So
call it.
that's pretty close to Czechoslovakia, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, let's see, he was born in 14 or 15, I believe it was.
Yeah. Okay.
And which, of course, I never knew, excuse me, never knew my real dad.
Yeah.
I never really known him until we found out some things later on.
Right. Okay. Now, what's your earliest memories? I know you told me before that you remembered kindergarten, and you said that you were the teachers were the SS. Is that correct? Or
Yes, now, they weren't in kindergarten. We were in kindergarten and did the normal things that the kids do here in the States.
right?
And I went to school for about 1.5 years or 2 years, first grade and second grade. And the teachers, we had regular teachers in the beginning, but then as time went by, they had some of the teachers had stayed, and others had those Nazi cross armbands on, so they
Right.
replaced them, the ones that didn't stay, to teach us. And
Right.
there was a political thing, of course, and they were grooming us actually probably for the Hitler Youth and stuff and growing
Uh-huh.
up. But they were very harsh on us. The discipline was number one. They taught us a lot of math. But it was very intense. Matter of fact, when I got to the States, they started me off. I hadn't had school in all these years. And when I came to the States, they started myself and my brother in the 6th grade. And we had to sit there in the back of the room and read all the books from the 1st grade through the 6th grade. And of course, the math wasn't a problem. But English wasn't a problem either. You could read it, but I didn't know what I was reading.
Yeah.
And we had the spelling bees and stuff like that, and I never will forget one word. We had a spelling bee, had to stand up. So the teacher said, spell bicycle. Well, I looked at it, I couldn't spell it. So I had to sit down. Next day, each day we had a different page that you had to kind of memorize. So the next day, I got up and she asked, spell the word bicycle. The second time I couldn't spell it, so I had to sit back down
Now,
again.
this was in America, right?
This was in America then, yeah. And so the third time I went in there, she told me to spell bicycle again, but I practiced at home, and I stood there and I said Bicycle, and I can still spell it today.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, the schools, if you were asked a question in Germany in their school, everybody raised their hands whether you knew the answer or not. Now, if they called on you because you raised your hands and didn't know the answer, well, you got a whooping. And they took the switches they had, matter of fact, they were pretty rough. They had a cat o' nine tails and stuff like that too, but they hurt you. So discipline was the main thing there.
What about propaganda? Do you remember much propaganda? When you were in school in Germany. As far as like, I was seeing a documentary the other day, and school children were chanting kind of like calling Hitler their lord and all this stuff. They were doing these kind of nursery rhyme type things in school, talking about Hitler and how much they loved him and all this kind of stuff. Would you remember anything like that?
Well, nothing that stands out in particular like what you're just now saying, but there is one thing so far as indoctrination. Number one, I didn't know, of course, first and second grade, what America was, where it was, and all that stuff until the bomb started dropping. Just started asking questions. So
Yeah.
we didn't know anything about America. And the propaganda part of it was that I remember is Hitler speaking every Sunday on the radio. On his birthday, everybody had to have a flag hanging out the window. They had a lot of parades. But I remember seeing, it's almost like Armed Forces Day, but they had the tanks going by. And when this all happened, we had moved to Eger from Glauchau, because my dad at the time, he was stationed there, on which I don't remember him, like I said. He went to war. And let's see, things were pretty rough
Yeah.
in Eger. And things were okay so long that there was still peace in a way. Now, things were going on in the world, but we never did hear the propaganda. But of course, you didn't say anything derogatory. I remember Mom, when I would ask questions about several things, she would say, "No, don't say anything like this," because they did have people over there in a section, say in a block, a block monitor. And within this one monitor, they had, I call them spies, okay? Mm-hmm. They had these spies within the complex. So you never knew, and people were spying at one another, really divided everybody. Nobody trusted one another. Mm. And later on, of course, Mom was caught listening to the British broadcast, which was off limits. Anything that you would listen to that wasn't German, you got in trouble, they picked you up. But that radio station would let us know when the bombs would come on over and kind of bomb the place. They gave us a time frame. They never called the direction, that the Germans found that out because we heard their broadcast then saying they're like in Munich or say different towns that they bombed, and it got closer to us, and that's when we knew to get on the ground.
Now, your father, you remember what year he went in to the German army?
When he went into the army?
Yeah. I know he went in before the war.
Yeah, he went in, but I don't remember the year. I remember they married twice. They had a military wedding, and they had a private wedding,
right,
or a civil wedding, so to speak. But I don't know. I was born in '36, so.
Yeah, but he initially went into the band, German Army band, right?
Yeah, he is a musician. He played the French horn.
Right.
And so when he was drafted in there,
right,
he was in the band and stuff, and I think he was a special band, like he had when they had these parades and everything.
Right.
So he played the French horn, and of course that changed really fast.
Now he was enlisted at that time, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what I know the war started in September the 1st, 1939, so you were really young at that time. Yeah. What was your first memories of the war itself?
Well, the first the first thing I can remember, it started off quite slow. They would blow sirens saying that planes were in the area, and everybody went into the cellar. And the cellars we had in this complex that we lived is about 6 or 7 story tall. It was a communal cellar, and everybody had a little section where you kept your potatoes,
Right.
fruits, and stuff like this. A nice, cool place. Up in the attic, it was the same thing. You had these sections, it was a caged-in area, almost like with chicken wire, and that was your storage area to
Right.
put your stuff in. And so it was kind of split up so you had more room in your apartment. And so the sirens would be blowing, and nothing would happen, but we would all go down into the cellar. And the cellars downstairs, what they had, each section of this complex was connected underground from cellar to cellar to cellar. And what they had a wall there, and they had knocked part of the wall out, a round hole, and they would cement it in, which it was easy to knock out in case something happened in one area. You could crawl through it. And to this, that was the indoctrination we had, and we always took our bags with us.
But I think you told me that early on that y'all would write out the attacks in the basement of your house, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's where we went. We went in the cellar, and that was on the ground, but not very far because they had the laundry there too.
Right.
And so everybody went there, and that's where we went almost every attack. But as things progressed, things got worse. Well, we lived in an area where they had the factories. That was an acre. They had the airfield, and they had train station. And the train station, it was actually a terminal. They had about 16 tracks going in, and they had a roundabout where they would change locomotives. They hook them on to different things.
It sounds like you
quite
were in proximity to targets. Like you're right in the hot, like, kind of like a hot zone.
Well, y'all live close to where they made the first jet fighter, right? The M262.
Yeah. Well, matter of fact, they even had a B. Was it the B-19s they had?
Yeah.
That had the land there going back to Britain or wherever they were stationed at the time, and the Germans took it apart and really assembled it to find out the secrets of it, I guess. And also they had that jet, the 252, and when we were out playing, a bunch of us guys looking around, and what we did, we heard planes, and every time we heard the planes, just later on, we would head for a ditch if we were caught in the open and stuff like that. And we heard this funny noise, didn't know what it was. Looked up in the sky. Sky was blue, noise was getting louder and louder, couldn't see anything. And it was a few days later when we saw it shimmer in the sunlight, and we looked, and of course, we finally figured out, we saw the plane, and then the noise came and stuff like that. And we didn't know what it was. And I really didn't know anything until I got back to the States what it was. But we saw the first jet that flew. Yeah. And
before we get into the actual bombing and all that, I remember you telling me about you would go to your grandmother's house, right? And there was a ditch where they kept Jewish prisoners, and y'all would bring them. You would bring them potatoes and.
Yeah, that was in Glauchau.
Yeah.
Glauchau, Germany. They had a river going by, and they had basically they had all kinds of prisoners. They had French, they had Jews. They were just prisoners in general, a whole lot of them. And they've been there for a long time. And so we went there and we talked to them and all this stuff, and they were begging us for food. And so we went back and we gave them potatoes, which the guards were just regular army guards. They let us give them food and stuff like that. And we did this for a while, and there was one of them down there that carved. Now, he had a pocket knife, and he carved out of a block of wood a bird with like the feathers, the tail feathers, that they were really there. And then the rest of it was just carved. And for the potatoes that we gave them, they were just raw potatoes. And so they stayed there for a while, and whatever happened to them, I don't know. Right. But so far, everything was good. We haven't really been affected by the war that much.
Now, the bird that he carved for you, y'all weren't able to save that from the war or anything, right?
No, everything that we had lost.
Yeah.
We lost.
Right.
And so, no, it was just a plain block of wood.
Right.
No paint or nothing, of course. And it's just carved.
Right. So, now, you getting to the war itself, I know. I remember, if I remember right, there were about 4 times that y'all came close to dying. Now, the first time, I believe, was when y'all were walking and there was some Hitler Youth and they were in front of you, and there was some kind of explosive laying on the ground, and one of them reached down and picked it up and blew up and killed him, maybe a couple of them. And if they hadn't have maybe, picked that up, y'all might have been blown up. Is that how that goes, or?
Yeah, what it was, actually, the reason we lived about, say, 1.5 miles or 2 from downtown Hager, and it's a beautiful city. It's over 1,000 years old.
Right.
And it had got bombed.
Right.
In a strategic area down there. So everybody always, when we did have a bombing, it wasn't all that great at the time. It was just a sporadic thing.
Right.
So we all went downtown to see what the damage was. And of course, a lot of people got killed, and we went to the funeral.
Right.
And so when we left the funeral was what they did. They had a big moat
Right.
that they had dug, and they threw everybody in there because they were all in pieces. They were just the ones that
Right.
were in pieces they
Right.
had in that moat. And so we left there to eat something on our way home. And we were walking all this time. And so anyway, we stopped to get something to eat because it took most of the morning and everything. And we started toward that restaurant, and of course they have cobblestones over there. And usually what they told us was after they dropped bombs and stuff, they would drop some anti-personnel mines. That's what they said. They would blend in with the cobblestones. Well, we went toward the restaurant on the sidewalk, and we were fixing to cross the street to go to the restaurant. There were these 3 Hitler Youths in front of us, and we were about, maybe 30 feet, 40 feet behind them, going in the same direction. And if it was an anti-personnel mine, one of them had stepped on it, killed him, and it disfigured, it hurt the other 2. Now, had it not been for those guys, we were going in the very same direction.
Mm-hmm.
And it was my brother, my mom, and myself.
Wow.
One of us would have stepped on that thing, too.
Wow.
That was
Yeah.
the first time, yeah.
Wow. Now, the second time you and your brother were out in the street, I think, and air raid sirens went off, and American planes were coming down and strafing the street, and y'all thought y'all could get home, and you took off running, trying to get to your house, and you didn't really have enough time because the bullets were coming down, and somebody reached out and grabbed you. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, back then, the reason we were so far from home, we were a good half hour from home.
Right.
And back then, when they were dropping the bombs, kids went out into the craters, and we picked up shrapnel, and they paid you money for it, which they made ammo out of that. So the Americans, they were dropping their steel, and we took the steel and made stuff and shot it back at them. So I don't know where it went after that. But that's where we were going to do.
Yeah.
We didn't do it that day because people started to run. Now, the sirens weren't even blowing at that point because it got to the point where
Right.
the sirens weren't going very well. And people were running everywhere, and we were from home, and we started to run, and then we would hear some sirens in the distance, but not right where we were. And we started to run, and we heard airplanes, of course. Then you really picked up your speed because what they did, they had the fighters that would come across first, and this was later on, of course. They had the fighters come, and they would strafe to get everything out of the way, and they got ahead of the bombers. Well, they started to shoot, and we were running. And all of a sudden, somebody grabbed us and took us in. Well, they jerked us into this house, and the house had these, what do you call them, maybe 8x8 posts, and they had these Dutch doors. The front door was a Dutch door. They grabbed us, pulled us in there, and as soon as we got in there, everything just disintegrated. And so what had happened was they had had they not grabbed us up the street, we would have gotten blown in half because of what I know now. They were using 50 caliber machine guns.
Oh, yeah.
But it disintegrated those big posts, the doors, and everything. And of course, we were crying and screaming and stuff like that, and probably wetting our pants and all that. Just goes with it. And then we ran out of there while things were still going on just to get home. We just want to get home.
Wow.
And we made it on that point.
Now the other time was your mom. They were dropping propaganda leaflets. The American Air Force was dropping propaganda leaflets, and she actually picked them up and read some of them, right?
Yeah, she did read some of those things. And the propaganda was that when they would drop these leaflets, they would drop candy and stuff like this
Right.
and everything. And they told us not to eat the candy or anything. And I don't even know if the candy was real or anything like that. We didn't, but Mom actually picked up the propaganda.
Right,
And
right,
I don't know what it said. She never did say anything like that.
right.
But that wasn't one of the times we got saved. You know, that was just
Well,
an
but
incident.
what I'm leading to is the fact that she went into a store that was owned by a man who was part of the Nazi Party, or he was maybe
Yeah.
tied with the SS or whatever, Gestapo, and he overheard her talking about reading the propaganda, was it the Gestapo that came and picked her up and took her off and left you guys without a mother and left y'all with neighbors for a few days? And
Yeah. And then what had happened was, of course, you weren't allowed. Well, the propaganda also was the British BBC, I think
right,
it was.
right,
And of course, that was off limits. Nobody could listen to it. And of course, they came across on Sundays, and that's usually when the bombing took place.
right,
And we were bombed literally night and day, because the British would bomb at night, and the Americans would come around noonish or
right,
something like that.
right,
So she was listening to this, and nobody knew this person. He was an SS, but never wore the uniform or anything. And he did own the local store. It was just a little store. You could get milk, and
Right.
just little things, to take home
Right.
bread, just staples, basically. It wasn't a market or nothing like that. Well, I forgot now if he lived below us or above us. But anyway, he had heard the radio program that Mom was listening to, and that was it. And he turned her in. Well, Mom told us that she was going to go someplace and said the neighbor's going to take care of us. Well, she stayed gone for quite some time, and nobody knew where she was. And the neighbors, Treader was her last name. Matter of fact, and after the war, we did find them. Our neighbor, they got away too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the Treader was her name. They had 2 boys,
Right.
and they kept us. And Mom came back, and she told us that she was guilty of this thing, and we're going to have to go to Theresienstadt. It's a concentration camp.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, this was in Poland or Czechoslovakia.
I think it was in Czechoslovakia,
Yeah.
but it was Theresienstadt, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, was at a showplace concentration camp. In other words, it was like a real concentration camp, but they used it for propaganda purposes. They would go in there and they would show the inmates like with nice little housing and little plots of land where they were growing gardens and things like that as propaganda to show this is a model concentration camp. But in actuality, when the cameras were turned off, they were a real concentration camp,
Right.
And but anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's what this thing was, but
Yeah.
we never saw it. That was
Right.
good luck. We'll talk about that shortly.
Right, right,
And so anyway, they picked her up again, and when she came back, she said that we were going to this camp. That's what she told us later, and I don't know what the terminology was, anything like that.
Well, let me stop you there. Do you think she was tortured while she was gone, or?
Well, I don't quite know about this. I'm pretty sure, because after the war, she was caught by the Russians, and they tortured her then.
Yeah.
When she was trying to cross over and stuff like that. But
But I mean, you don't know if she was tortured by the Germans when they had her when she was gone those few weeks.
Well, looking at Mom at the time, she looked pretty normal. Of course, haggard looking, tired and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
I never saw bruises or nothing. Well, I wouldn't
Right.
see anything like that anyway. But she went through the ordeal, and whatever happened, they were going to send us to the place.
Well, see, this is one reason I ask you this, because this leads up to the other time y'all were saved, because it's almost like divine intervention, because they were going to come back and put her in the concentration camp, and probably you guys too. Okay, but then there was this massive bombing raid, wasn't it? An American bombing raid, and that's when y'all decided to go from the y'all's house over to this communal bombing shelter, and tell us about what happened there.
Now that was interesting. They built it really fast. This is supposed to be a bomb-proof shelter, and they built it for the people coming from the train stations and just
Right.
all around. It was a communal thing. It was a really big place, and it was built out of concrete, bricks, and what have you.
Right.
Us being kids like we were, we built our own little bunker, and of course the next day they take the bricks from us and they would tear our stuff down and use it for the real thing. Well, it took about a year or so to have this thing complete, but we played with it in it all the time, so we were kind of familiar with the layout
Right.
and all this stuff. And so they finally had it finished one time, and at that point of the war, this was the last bombing event that we had. And before this one here, we were up at night 24 hours. Of course, they were bombing all this time. Couldn't sleep, couldn't go out to eat, and nothing like that. Always had the suitcases packed.
Mm-hmm.
And we went into our cellar. So we kept after Mom all this time, saying, "Oh, come on, Mom, let's go on over to the cellar. It's neat. It's all this stuff our kids would do." And she would always say, "No, no, no."
Uh-huh.
So this was on a Sunday, and it was April.
It was Easter, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was a Easter Sunday.
Yeah.
And it was April 1945.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure about the date on that because I looked it up one time.
Right.
And so finally that day, it was Sunday. And no sirens or nothing, just the loudspeakers were on, saying a regular thing, say, "Achtung, Achtung, feindliche Flugzeuge greifen unsere Stadt an." That means enemy airplanes are attacking the city.
Right.
Like that, or going to attack the city. Well, she finally decided, yeah, this will go, because we kept pulling on and all that stuff. And so we went over there to the cellar. And we went in there and sat and sat and sat. And of course, we didn't have radios going or nothing like that. And we had lights and all this. And you could hear, all of a sudden, bombs exploding in the distance. Nothing would shake or anything like that. At that point, you just heard thuds, and it just kept getting louder, 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 and as they got louder and louder, they got closer, and then things started to shake. Well, the way the cellar was laid out, it was a big, long hallway, and it had cubicles, but didn't have doors, but openings offsetting one another,
Mm-hmm.
and that's to keep, like if one comes through, to keep from the other side getting hurt, because the openings were staggered, so the blast wouldn't get in. Well, one went through this bomb-proof cellar, right above us, just away from us, but it blew the walls in. And of course, before this happened, the lights would go off because they had hit the power stations before the bombs actually hit the shelter. So people started to light candles and all this stuff, and then when the bombs came over, it was just terrible. We were sitting there with the wooden planks, and I was sitting there every time it happened with my ears stuck in, my fingers stuck in my ears, and you still could hear the noise, and you could hear the drones of the planes. And I looked it up. Well, that day when they bombed Eger, they had 170 some odd planes that came over. These were the 19s, or they were it might have been the planes with the three tails or something.
B-17 or
might have been
B-24.
I don't know. It's one of the two.
Yeah.
But it's that many of them.
Yeah.
And they had these new bombs, we learned later. They called them blockbusters.
Right.
And that's what came through this bomb-proof shelter.
Wow.
But anyway, it blew the walls over, and it actually broke the bench in our cellar, little place there. And of course, everybody was scrambling. People were screaming. Nobody could see. The candles weren't even lit. There was dust. You couldn't breathe.
Y'all were basically buried in there,
Yeah,
right?
we were buried in there for 24 over.
How did she, I remember you telling me about how she
Yeah. Got us to breathe.
Was able to help y'all breathe. How did she do that?
Well, we had our little suitcases.
Yeah.
My brother and I, and she had the bigger suitcase with everything that we may have needed in case of a situation, which there was a situation. She had the sanitary napkins with her, and she tied those around our nose and mouth.
Right.
To filter the dust and all that stuff. And this is how we survived all this time. And of course, when they dug us out, there was nothing left of our house. Well, it wasn't a house, it was a complex. It was a block long. You know, in the middle of it, it had everybody dumped their ashes and hung their laundry out and all that stuff.
How long were you in there for?
And we were buried for over 24 hours. That long, if not longer. And when we came out, we were standing on bricks. Just from houses around it. There were no streets, just holes. Everything was on fire.
Tell me about you. I remember you telling me how gruesome the sight was. You said there were body parts everywhere.
Yeah. And so apparently they caught some people coming from the train stations and stuff like that. And the people were out there in wagons, hay wagons, drawn by oxen or whatever, because nothing could go through. And they had them parked in different places, and people would pick up parts and put them in sacks and just dump them into this big hay wagon. And this is how they buried them finally. So nobody knew who they were.
Yeah.
And when we stood on this mound of bricks looking around, and believe it or not, Mom found one of our pots out of all that rubble.
Yeah.
And we were standing there looking around. We did not know where we were.
Wow.
Didn't even know.
And that's what saved your life or probably saved you from a lot of possible deprivation because the Gestapo couldn't find y'all because they didn't know where you lived because the whole village was gone, basically.
Yeah. Well, no, not the whole village, just that section.
That section.
That section was completely gone, and hopefully the SS was gone too.
Right.
But that was the fourth time that we got saved, and it's ironic, like we were fixed. That Sunday when the Americans came.
Right.
And bombed us was the Sunday we were supposed to be incarcerated.
Right.
And the irony of it is, even when we got to the States, they said, well, aren't you afraid? I mean, don't you hate the Americans for doing what they did? I told the story. I said, well, they saved our lives, in more ways than one.
Well, while we're talking about this right here, I know Janice one time on Facebook kind of challenged me because I forget why she did, but it was over. I think I was talking about the fire bombings of Tokyo and Japan, and how it led eventually to the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And she was kind of equating that America was guilty of terror bombing or terrorism the same way that maybe Al Qaeda or something like that. And I couldn't see the relationship between what they were doing in World War II. Now I will say this, that America actually did things different than Britain did, because Britain, they were doing terror bombings. They were bombing at night indiscriminately, and actually the Americans went to great lengths with the northern bomb site to avoid civilian casualties. They would try to target, military targets and that type of thing, more so than the British. I'm not saying they didn't do some of it, because, they joined with the British at Dresden, and did the firebombing of Dresden, which was as bad as anything the Americans did in Japan. But how do you look at that? Do you think do you look at that as just being something that was necessary in war, or do you have any kind of animosity toward the Americans for doing that? I mean, for bombing your home and all that,
No, not really, because what happened for a reason.
Right.
And of course, if we were saved because of it, and that was the only war we understood.
Right.
I mean, they were bombing, not us as civilians, but they were bombing for an all-out war. Everything was going to be hit. And so they happened to hit the civilian population.
Right. Right.
And so this is, well, we didn't accept it, but that's the way things were.
Right.
Now, going to Tokyo and stuff like that, well, that was another thing. They were going to drop the bomb on them to save all these American lives because
Right.
we had to invade Japan.
Well, see, even with Japan, the American military, or the American Air Force, actually started the bombing campaign trying to replicate what they did in Germany. In other words, with the Norden bomb sight, try to hit military targets. But the problem you had in Japan was that they had the what do they call that, the jet stream that's different in Japan. And what it was doing, it was blowing these bombs sometimes off course. And so what's his name? I can't remember the general.
Hey, this is Connor editing the podcast. The name he was looking for is General Curtis LeMay.
He had to come up with a whole different way of bombing. You know, he had to come up with a firebomb incendiaries and go in at 500 feet in order to bomb, because they couldn't do the pinpoint bombing kind of like they did in Germany because of the jet stream. And so what happened was, in Japan, you had all those wooden paper buildings, you know, that the Japanese traditionally lived in. So naturally, when that fire hit those paper wooden buildings, it created a firestorm, you know. But the point I'm trying to make is that America at first tried, you know, to do the pinpoint bombing like they did in Germany, and see, another thing the Americans were doing, they were losing a lot of people doing the daylight bombings because they made a better target, you know. I mean, they could be seen, you know, and plus they were trying to do this pinpoint bombing, you know, which was very costly. I think overall our casualties were at like 80,000 people or 80,000 men during the course of the war, you know, the bombing campaign, you know, and that's a lot of people, you know.
I have a question for you,
Yeah.
actually, for either of you. You know, this tactic of surrounding a train station or a industry
Right.
with civilians,
Right.
you know, to use it as
Like
a buffer,
yeah.
you know, to so there's less likely to be bombed. Was that a tactic that Germany used back then, where they would put civilians in proximity?
I'm not aware that they did that.
Did they use them as
not like
as a
Saddam
shield?
Hussein did,
You know, like a
like a
shield.
human shield.
Right.
No, I'm not aware they did that. You know, but I will say that a lot of these industries were pretty close to residential neighborhoods, you
Right.
know. So naturally, they didn't have the technology in World War II like they had, you know, like they did during the Gulf War or now, where you can you can put a bomb right in a window,
Sure.
you know, that type technology. But the Norden bomb sight was it was a pretty accurate tool for that time. You know, they were able to do some pretty pinpoint bombing, but of course, naturally, you're going to have, you're going to have some civilians dying in situations like that. There's going to be mistakes and stuff like that. The only thing I'm pointing out is at least the Americans made an attempt to save lives by the way they were bombing at great sacrifice to themselves.
By doing a daytime.
By doing daytime bombing, because they could see, you know, they could see a lot better in the day. It was a strategy they were using, you know, to try to. But actually, though, as the war progressed, they were trying to take out factories like ball bearing factories and airplane factories and things like that. But what really finally brought Germany down was going after their petroleum industry. That was toward the end of the war. And then toward, I think, sometime in 1944, the American Air Force was able to finally defeat the German Air Force, you know, like in the skies. Like they were coming up to meet our bombers and bringing heavy casualties, but I forget what month it was, but it was sometime in 1944, we pretty much cleared the German skies of German fighters, you know, which that helped decrease our casualty rates, because we weren't having to face the German Air Force, when we were doing our bombing attacks and stuff, like we were early on. But anyway, getting back to this, so basically, your mom was, and you guys were saved from going to the concentration camp. Of course, one thing you got to factor in too is that this was in April of 1945. The war was over on May the 8th, so I don't know how long y'all would have had to stay there, but still, that would have been a terrible thing to have to go to a concentration camp.
See, at the time, I mean, the war was going on, and we didn't have any idea how close
Right.
it was to coming to an end.
Right.
So it was just another day. So,
Now, after everything was blown up, y'all were on your own. You didn't have anything to eat. Y'all were probably, it'd be like a tornado coming through and just wiping everything out. Y'all didn't have water, food, and stuff like that. So didn't y'all go and near the airport, and there was some caves out in that area? Y'all lived in for a while?
well, actually, what it was, well, number one, just before we lost our house, there were a
Right.
lot of refugees that came through Eger from different towns that were
Right.
bombed out, and they asked us to take in a person to
Right.
give them shelter. Well, this young girl that stayed with us, we never saw her again because she just stayed with us until we lost her home. We don't know where she went.
Right.
And so, what had happened, once everything was gone, everybody was on their own, like you said. And we went with a bunch of refugees leaving Eger, going down the trail, which later I found out it was the airfield. We went past the airfield,
Right.
and they had some caves there, and they had some Air Force barracks or military barracks and everything like that. And matter of fact, there was some German soldiers that we were following too. They were kind of protecting us. And on our way over there, they had roadblocks. And of course, there were trees on both sides of these narrow roads, and we could see discarded military weapons like Panzerfaust, rifles, pistols, everything like that.
Right.
And we had to go around those things, which we did. Well, we wound up in this camp. Let's call it a camp. And they put us, because there were so many of us, in these caves. And we were in there. And what Mom had in her possession was a box of all of our family. They were all a military family, and she
Right.
had all the medals, and she had uniforms, but not with us at the time. So she was a keeper of
Right.
the history of our military.
Right.
And so she had that with her. So we were in those caves, and of course we hadn't been able to get anything to eat or anything. So we went on outside one time. It was maybe a day or two later, and the soldiers were gone. But they left some cans of food in the barracks.
The Germans were gone.
Yeah, the German
Yeah.
soldiers were gone. And so we went back into the cave. We had found a few cans of food, and we ate it. And there must have been maybe 15 or some odd people with us, because little nooks in these caves. And so we were in there, and one guy finally decided to go out and see what was going on, because we didn't know what it was, what was going on. Didn't hear any more bombs. We heard gunfire and stuff like that. And so he came back and he gave us the news. He said, "Oh, the Americans, everybody's getting killed by the Americans and stuff like that." So everybody was terrified. And they asked why. And they said, "Well, they were Nazis and stuff like that." And I didn't know what they were,
Right.
But Mom knew. And so she had this box of all these medals, and she buried those things. And so anyway, we stayed there a few
These
more
belong
days.
to your father, right?
Well, my dad, my grandfather, great-grandfather,
Oh,
these were
okay.
all the military
Right,
people,
right.
yeah, through the ages.
Right.
And so there we were, and another person or two people left, and they didn't stay gone but a few hours, and they came back and said, "Come on out, everything's okay." They said, "The Americans are in Eger, and they're all around us, and they're good to the people, and they're giving kids gum to chew, and
Right.
we call it cow gummy." And
Yeah.
we thought it was really funny, they were chewing their gum all the time.
Right.
And they got cigarettes, and they threw their butts away. It didn't have filters on them back then.
Yeah.
And the German kids would pick up those butts and give them to their dads and those stuff. They were
Right.
picking
right.
stuff up,
Right.
and they were really good to the kids. Well, at the time they were kind of taking people and put them in different situations. Like Mom knew some people down by this old castle
Right.
that they knew they had a restaurant. And so the old castle of Agar, that's what it was. And they had a beautiful church right next to that too. And so we went there, and of course we ate good because she was a waitress and all this. Well, in the meantime, I think it was the First Army that came through.
Right. First Infantry Division.
First Infantry, yeah, because I remember the big red one.
Right.
And so they had about a whole lot of deuce and a halves, 2.5 ton trucks. And Mom, she took English in school. So she could speak English, broken English, but she knew what was going on, and her profession was a chef. So she was cooking at different places. Matter of fact, Hitler came through Leipzig one time on a tour, and he was a vegetarian, and Mom was on duty, but they didn't know he was coming. And she was just on duty, so you can say she cooked for him, you know.
Right,
so I don't know what she cooked, but she was telling me briefly that,
Right.
And she didn't say anything if she really met him or anything, but
Right.
she was on duty when
Right.
this happened. Well, so this was her job, and of course she befriended the Americans and all that stuff, and they told her that all these deuce and a halves were taking some people out of Agar if she wanted to go. And of course, yeah, we needed to go because we didn't have anything to go to, you know.
Yeah.
And so with her expertise in being a chef and all this stuff, they loaded us up on a deuce and a half, and it was filled to capacity, standing room only. And
Right.
I got another front seat, but I stood on the front right over the cab where I could see everything. And then we went through villages and villages, so finally we stopped, and they made, my stepdad, he was among them, he was in supply.
Uh-huh.
And so he managed to get her a job cooking for refugees going through, and Americans actually fed all these refugees. Well, Mom kept following Dad from place to place because he was getting transferred. And so while this was going on, of course, we were eating good and all this stuff, and she kept after him, and finally in 1947, they married.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, of course, my stepdad, us knowing that my dad was dead, you know, he looked almost like my dad. I mean, there was a similarity there.
Right.
And so, of course, in 1948, the late part of 1948 is when we came to the States.
Okay, now stop there. Let's go to your dad now. Now, your dad, once the war started, he went into Poland, I guess, with the German forces, right? And then when Hitler invaded France and Belgium, he went into that campaign. And then after, now he didn't. Now once he got out of that, now he didn't have anything to do with taking over Denmark, Norway, and all that, right? I mean, he was pretty much just in Poland, France, Belgium.
Yeah, at that point he was infantry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. He was no longer in the band by this time, right?
No.
Okay.
all the cushion jobs were gone.
Yeah.
And so he started off. They invaded. They went through Belgium.
Right.
That was a good battle there.
Right.
Then France, from
Right.
Belgium to France, that was just bad. He was with that.
Right.
And then after France, they went to Poland. And while he was in Poland, I've got pictures of this. He always smoked the cigarettes in a halter, and he was walking past the locomotive. And they were going to the invasion of
Russia.
Barbarossa.
They were getting lined up to
go to Russia, yeah.
Okay, now Operation Barbarossa, which was June the 22nd, 1941, they went into Russia. Now, he went through that, and of course, the Russian winter stopped him. In November of the spring rain. The fall rains, and then the onset of winter, which was a rough winter that year in Russia, stopped the Operation Barbarossa. Now they did get as far as they could see the church spires in Moscow. That's how close they came, to Moscow. Now by this time, though, the Russians are regrouping. They're finally starting to resist and push, back the Germans somewhat. And then then they winter there in Russia, and then they come up to the spring of 1942, and they reopen their offensive. And at this time, they decided to go down towards Stalingrad and the Caucasus. I think they call it the Caucasus Mountains. I may not pronouncing that right, but they were heading toward the oil fields. Okay, because they were needing that oil. And then that's when Stalin decided to make a stand at Stalingrad, and then of course we all know what happened there. They got surrounded, and eventually, by the winter of '43, the Germans were finally, the Sixth Army was finally captured there at Stalingrad. And then the great Russian offensive, happened that started pushing the German army back slowly toward Germany. Now, your father was captured at Kiev, right?
Kiev,
Yeah. And tell me what you know about that.
Well, he told me when I finally met him, while they were going through Russia, into Russia, this was the staging phase of it.
Right.
And actually, he said that the Russians were cheering them, the peasants and stuff, were cheering them on and all this stuff, and saying hello, and the Germans weren't really on the move at that point. They were just gathering strength, like that.
Right.
And they were actually put up by some of these peasants in their homes and all this stuff, and fed them and all this stuff. And of course, then things just happened. The SS came after the German army started to move.
Right.
Well, they killed those peasants because they were Jewish or different nationalities.
Right.
They killed them, of course. That really burned the population.
Actually, at first, the German army, when they first went in on Operation Barbarossa, that they were actually looked at as liberators.
Yeah.
Because Stalin was so bad,
Yeah, exactly.
to them. But then the SS screwed everything up,
And so what happened then, now Dad told us that as the German army really got on the move, the Germans built their own railroads and stuff like that because the gauge was different from the Russians and all this.
Right.
But because the SS had killed all these Russian civilians, the animosity was such that they had these partisans that started, and they were guarding. Well, the Germans had to guard the railroad because these partisans would kill the German soldiers. And in fact, I've got some pictures, where they had this funeral where some of the people.
Yeah, I remember you showing those. Yeah.
But they had this military funeral for these people. But that's what started the partisanship there against the Germans because of the SS, and it's the German military that really suffered for it, like that. And then, of course, Dad was never into the main action of it because they had different areas where they were stationed. I can't even tell you what outfit he was with, to be honest with you. If you told me, I forgot.
Well, okay, now, he's captured. He goes to the Russian Gulag in 44. Now, and I think you said he was released in 1948, which is 3 years after the war ends, now, why do you think your mom, now let me backtrack a little bit. You didn't find out that your dad was still alive until the late 70s, right?
Yeah, when Roots came out, the book
Roots.
Roots.
The book Roots, or the movie Roots.
Yeah, the movie,
And y'all got to thinking you'd like to check into your past, okay? Now, your mom had always said that she was told he died, and when did she find that out, or when did she say she found that out? In 47 or 46?
Well, we found out actually she had gotten a letter.
Right.
And I saw that, and it was a letter about 8 inches long or so, 8 by 5 maybe.
Right.
And it had the black rim around it and had a black cross on the top left, I believe it was. That was from the government saying that he was killed in action.
Right.
So Dad was dead from that point of view.
Okay, now, when did y'all get that letter? What you remember? What year?
Yeah, it was in 44.
44. So you got it from the German army,
Right.
or German
The
government.
right.
Okay. Now, one thing I want to say before we get any further, that out of the hundreds of thousands of German soldiers that were captured by the Russians, only a few thousand actually survived the gulags and everything. He pretty much starved them to death, worked them to death, killed them, whatever. So your dad was to have survived was a miracle, really, to have been able to survive all that. But didn't you find out when y'all got to studying? Didn't you find out that the mom had basically she found out that he was alive, but she kind of kept that lie going that he was dead, right?
Nothing. Well, basically, in a way, she did.
Yeah.
Because, we got to go back to 83.
Right.
Now,
right.
I saw the letter knowing that my dad was dead.
Right.
Now, she may or may not have known sooner. Well, she probably did because she was she met some of our family
Right.
like this, but nothing was said, and she tried to help them with food while we were over there before we came here.
Right.
So I don't know what really happened in between these times like that, and whether she knew or not. But if she did, she didn't want to go back to Germany.
So let me ask you this. Now, I know that, and I know Janice brought this up and as a possibility, and I don't know if she even alluded to this, but the Russians were guilty of, the Russians were encouraged by the commanders and even by Stalin because of their hatred for the German people and the Germans because of what the SS did, not what your father did or other soldiers like him, but the SS and the groups that went around killing everybody and all that. That they were, soldiers, Russian soldiers, as they went back into Germany, were encouraged to rape German women, and also they mistreated the German people immensely. I know that, like in the situation like you were talking about, when they heard rumors that the Americans were going to mistreat them and all that, actually the Germans, I'm not saying what you're saying is not true, but what I'm saying is that the Germans themselves tried to get into the American lines and to the British lines because they figured they would get treated better than they would with the Russians, the way they were, brutalizing the population. So I'm wondering if your mom, Janice brought this up, your wife brought this up, that this could have been a possibility that maybe your mom had at some point after the war had gone to look, for your father and maybe ran into a bunch of Russian soldiers, and that maybe she got gang raped, and this is why she wanted to mislead y'all into believing that your dad was dead.
Well, the thing I know about it, because she didn't tell me until later, but actually, I don't think the Russians were told to do this. That was the mentality of the Russian soldier himself.
Right.
They were just mavericks. They did
Right.
it on their own while they were on guard duty and stuff like that.
Right.
But to get back to Mom, she found out that we had some relatives that survived the war.
Right.
And so she found out where they were, and because they needed food and everything, and it was in a Russian area, Russian zone. So she and some of her girlfriends got together. They had family over there, and they were carrying food over there to those people. And so she was gone. We were staying with some people. We were living in Ansbach then. And so this babysitter was taking care of us, and that was
Right.
a bad experience there while Mom was gone. And she was only going to be gone about a week or two. My God, she was gone over a month and a half. And when she showed up, the babysitter actually left my brother and myself by ourselves, and we lived in a bad situation because she wasn't there half the time, and we had gotten lice, and you would comb your hair, and those things would fall on the newspapers and stuff.
Wow.
It was deplorable.
Yeah.
And the food was getting scarce too. And so Mom finally showed up after, God, it was just months. And so, like I said, the babysitter left. So we asked Mom what happened and all that stuff. And then she didn't tell me until later on what really happened. She just said that they had some bad luck. And back then, to get into the Russian zone, they didn't have a wall. They just had like a barbed wire fence. And you just, like if the farmers, they just fence off an area. And that's what it was. And it was a wooded area and all that stuff. They picked that to go in between the barbed wire. And they went in there and they got it into the place. They never, they went and they delivered the food. And on their way back, they went back in a different way, but similar, close to it. And it just so happened it was close to one of the posts, guard posts. Well, they were caught getting back. And they detained them all this time. And the women, they were all raped. And they kept them there till they got tired of them and whatever have you. And they turned them loose. But before they turned them loose, Mom, of course, they were dressed in winter clothes and all this stuff. And they had boots. Well, those Russians would cut the heels off their boots to punish them that much more.
Wow.
And when she showed up, she just had rags tied around her shoes, her boots and stuff like that to get there. And she had scars on her and all that stuff, and she hitched rides to get back to Unspo where we were.
Oh, wow.
And in the meantime, she had a motorcycle wreck. She caught a ride on the motorcycle, and she was all bloodied up and had some hair missing and all this.
Oh, wow.
And she just looked bad. But she showed up at the good time because the babysitter was gone. We didn't know where she was.
Right.
And, of course, she had to get us treated and everything, and we moved from that place, of course, you know.
Wow.
And she had
Now,
to
is
recover.
This is after she had met your stepfather, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This was after because
Right.
she was able to get some canned goods and some good
Right.
stuff, you know.
Right.
And she went over there.
Okay, now, so she marries your stepfather in 1948,
47, I believe it was.
47, okay, and y'all come back to the United States in 48, right?
Right, we did, but he
Okay.
left in 47.
Okay. He went over to the United States ahead of y'all.
Right.
Okay. Well, but that's where Geneva, New York is where you first set up residence, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right, yeah.
Okay. And y'all came over here on a ship, right? And then probably New York City, and then moved on to Geneva. Is that right?
Yeah, well, actually, let's see, when we came over, it was in the daytime, and because Mom was sick,
Right.
and it took us over 3 weeks to get here because we had to stay in Atlanta. We came over in November.
Right.
When the Atlantic was really rough, that it had the storms, and it actually blew us back
Right.
several days. Then we had to stay with a disabled ship till it got the parts
Right.
flown to it. And of course, Mom was sick and seasick. Everybody was seasick except us kids. You know, we had the
Right.
free reign of the ship, the dining
Right.
room, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Mom would keep us out of her room, give us a quarter, because they had these Coke machines for nickels and candy bars for 5 cents, and that entertained us. And the mistake we made, we went into the room with all that food in it because it made her throw up again.
Oh, no.
So she didn't
Yeah.
eat all this time.
Yeah.
But when we got to New York, we got there, saw the Statue of Liberty, and everybody that was seasick wasn't seasick anymore.
Oh,
All of a sudden,
wow.
they were all on deck just
Yeah.
looking at this stuff.
Yeah.
And they pulled us into one of the berths there. And golly, it was about 10 or 12 o'clock that night before we left there. And they took us to a place around New York. Golly, I forgot the name of that air base where everybody goes. I'll think of it here shortly. But we stayed there for about 2 or 3 weeks.
So your father was stationed there, right?
No, actually, he was stationed in,
Or your
in
stepfather,
Louisiana.
I mean.
Yeah, he was stationed in Louisiana, but he came to get us to take us back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
and so, doggone, I wish I could remember the name of the place. It'll come to me.
Yeah.
So we stayed there about 2 or 3 weeks, and he came and got us. And of course, we went to Barksdale
Yeah,
Barksdale,
down in Louisiana.
in
yeah.
Louisiana, Bossier
Yeah.
City.
So that's where y'all, after you initially landed in New York, that's where y'all lived, was in Louisiana, right?
That's when we lived with my stepdad. Yep. Before
Yeah.
that, we were by ourselves with the rest of the refugees. You know,
Right.
the war brides they called them, and all that stuff. Was it Camp Kilmer? No.
Oh.
Well,
Yeah. Well, okay, now, I remember you telling me about your brother would have nightmares about the bombings and say he'd get up in the middle of the night and urinate in the bed and everything because he was trying to put out the fires. I remember you telling me about that.
Yeah, it was pretty tough when we first came over, and we started in school
Yeah,
in the 6th grade,
right,
like I told you, and of course we didn't speak English that well,
right,
and a lot of the kids they picked on us because we were different,
right.
and they threw rocks at us and they were really mean. And what they didn't know was though that that's what we did as kids in Germany. We had
Yeah.
rock fights and
Yeah.
stuff like that all the time, so we
Yeah.
were good at it.
Yeah,
Well, we hit a few of them, so we became friends, kind of like. But before that even happened, every time a plane would come over, we would run for the ditch. And they'd
Yeah.
laugh at us, see, and then
Yeah.
of course that was another strike against us.
right,
But
right,
once we proved ourselves, see, we were as tough as they were, well,
Right,
we
right.
became friends
right,
and all
right.
that. But in the meantime, living at home like this, and of course my brother, and well, I still have nightmares. I mean, it just doesn't go away. It's there. And he would get up at night. He'd scream and different things and sweat. Of course, we all did that. But this one particular night, he stood up in the bed, and he was speaking in German. He wanted to put the fire out and all this stuff, and he was urinating on the fire, which in reality he urinated in his bed, standing
Right.
up, putting out fires like
Right.
that. And we woke him up, and he was all sweaty and
Yeah.
what have you. And so that was one incident. But running from airplanes, when we heard them, that lasted a long time.
Oh, you had PTSD, obviously, but you didn't really realize you had it until I remember you were telling me you were eating at the old 101st Airborne down on Murfreesboro Road here in Nashville, and you went into or were going into the restaurant, and they had all those sandbags and made it look like a World War II scenario, and smelling those sandbags kind of threw you in out of kilter there, right?
Yeah, like I've always passed the 101st, but
Right.
I really didn't know it was a restaurant. It looked like a big antebellum building house,
Right, right,
So my wife and I decided to eat that one day. Instead of going into the front door, we went around by the side because they had a C-46 or 47 sitting
Right,
there.
right.
So, and I was showing her that and all that. So we hung out and I talked about it. And so instead of going back around to the front door, we decided to go in the back way, which they had looked almost like a tunnel-like thing.
Right.
So you've been there, haven't you?
right,
Yeah.
right.
With the sandbags, and I got in there, didn't get in there very far. And boy, and all of a sudden I started to shake, couldn't breathe, started to sweat, and couldn't get my breath and all this stuff. And Janice said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "I don't know. I got to get out of here." I just panicked and I ran out. Not into the restaurant, but
Right,
outside of
right.
it. And then we finally went into the front door to eat.
Right.
And then it finally passed. Well, we forgot about that all
Right.
these years.
Right,
And I kept having nightmares and stuff like
Right.
that, and just crazy stuff.
Right,
Like I was
right.
floating and just awful, sweating.
Right.
And so finally, it came about because I had these weird dreams.
right,
And so, of course, nobody knew what post-traumatic stress was, anything
Right,
like that. And
right.
so we didn't. So Janice started to look it up, and they said, well, what had happened to me in my case, when I passed this tunnel, which had the sandbags in it, and the musky smell and all that stuff reminded me of this bomb-proof
Right,
shelter that we were
right.
in. It was dingy smell and stuff like that.
right,
And it was the smell that triggered that response.
right.
And I never did know about it.
Oh, okay. You went and let's see, what year did you graduate from high school?
Well, actually, I left high school in the 10th grade, and I
Okay.
enlisted in the military.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I got the GED when I was in the military. And, of course, when I got out of the military, I've got the Korean GI Bill. I used that to go to MTSU, and I got my degree in that, Bachelor's of Arts.
Oh,
So you might say in 1954, I left Christmas of 1954.
so you joined the 11th Airborne Division, right?
What?
And then they were gonna send you back to Germany, right? And you decided to go over to the 82nd Airborne. So you wouldn't have to go to Germany again, right?
Yeah, that more or less was it. I went in there. Well, the propaganda got me. See, they had
Yeah.
nice uniforms and stuff, and I was running. My folks didn't even know I was gone because I was
Right.
always working,
Right.
and so I didn't even live at home. And I
Right.
was going to school and all that stuff, and
Right.
so some of us got together, decided to go and just enlist. And they
Right.
had this thing going on. They call it the buddy system. And so, of course, I was young enough, you know,
Right.
you lie about your age. So I was going on 18, but I was 17.
Right.
We went there and they took us. We passed the test. Well, out of 5 of us, 2 of us went. The rest of them didn't.
Yeah.
So I went in airborne unassigned. And of course, you know, airborne is airborne infantry. We
Right.
drop behind lines and stuff
Right.
like that. And so they send me to Fort Dix, New Jersey to take a basic training with the 69th Infantry Division.
Right.
And so from there, they send me to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, when I got to Kentucky, I went with the 11th Airborne Division, and they had the jump school there, and I went through jump school with them. Well, in the meantime, they decided to go to move the whole outfit to Germany, and the 82nd was going to Japan. I mean, bag and baggage, just everything.
Right,
The first
right.
time they tried it, and they called it Operation Gyroscope.
Right.
So everything we owned went that time. So I had a choice to go stay with the 11th and go to Germany, and I didn't want to go back there because I didn't have all those fond memories.
Right.
So I went with the 82nd Airborne. And the reason I was at Fort Campbell's because the 508th Airborne Division was a division of the 82nd itself. And so we went to Japan. We went to Kyushu Island, the southernmost island, and I was at Camp Wood. And some of the other companies went to Camp Chickamauga. And so we stayed there 1 year, supposed to stay 3 or 4, forever probably.
Right.
So they called us back, and they decided to reactivate the 101st Airborne Division. And so I was, but this is where I made my rank. I made the, what was it, the staff sergeant.
Staff sergeant, yeah.
Was made staff sergeant there because we were cadres for the 101st to train them.
Right.
And I was in the 502nd 101st regimental combat team or something like that, you know. So we trained them all. And then, of course, in 58, that's when I was discharged.
Okay. Now, did you actually go with the 101st down to Little Rock during the integration of Little Rock Central High School? Were you involved in that?
Some of us were involved to go to Little Rock, and they went by truck. And so I wasn't one to go really there,
Okay.
and then we went over there a little bit later to pick some stuff up, but not to go for the initial thing, you know.
Okay.
But some of the guys that were telling me, they said while they had to stand guards with fixed bayonets and all that
Right.
stuff, and some of the guys actually bayoneted the civilian because he was reaching for his M1, and
Yeah.
you don't do that
Yeah.
with fixed bayonets. So he took
Right.
he bayoneted the guy. You
Right.
know.
Oh, now you kind of went from career to career kind of deal, you know, after 58, right? I mean, when did you enroll in MTSU?
Well, actually, before I started at MTSU in '62, I was living in Atlanta for a while. I went to Atlanta Law School. I went to Atlanta Law School on Peachtree Street at night, and I was going to be an attorney, and I took domestic relation, torts, and just stuff like that. It was to me to it all. I didn't have to take all the isms and all that. So I decided to come back to Murfreesboro, and actually it was Middle Tennessee State College at the time. So I enrolled, took pre-law, and they gave us all these books to learn about foreign law and stuff like the isms, you know.
Right.
And I didn't like the department. So I quit college. Well, after a year, I quit. And I was having a good time, and, well, they got me out on scholastic probation. So anyway, then I went back a little bit later on in 70, 71, 72. It took me that long to get straight, you know, with the bills and all that to go back under the GI Bill. Well, I started to take law again, but I didn't. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so you go back and forth to these advisors. They advise you what you can take, and they didn't have computers then. They just had these cards, and you had to go back and forth. And by the time you got back where you came from, the classes were closed, so they determined. And one thing one of them said is, I saw him so many times that one day he said he reminded me of Columbus. He said he didn't, when Columbus left, he didn't know where he was going. When he was there, he didn't know where he was. When he came back, didn't know where he came from. So that was a joke going on.
Yeah.
But I wound up I got a BA in languages. And I got the two minors here. I got German, English, and history.
Now, when did you meet Janice?
I met Janice actually in 73. I graduated before she. I graduated in 74, so I met her just end of 73, beginning of 74. Because
Well, you and I were going to MTSU about the same time. I started in 72, and actually I went off and on up till 77. So.
yeah. Well, we have to look at the yearbook, because I looked like, I tell you what, I had long hair. You wouldn't believe it now.
Yeah.
I had long hair, and I had this robe on. I looked like an attorney,
Yeah.
You wouldn't recognize. I could look at your picture, too, when we get in there.
Okay, well, y'all moved over near us. I've known you, you and Janice and your kids since the late 70s, I guess. Y'all moved over in our neighborhood by then, and actually I knew Janice more than I knew you. I've kind of got pretty close to you in the last few years since we first talked, about this situation. And but you said you watched the movies Roots, and that got you interested in trying to find out more about your father, I guess, and y'all stumbled upon some letters that were indicating that y'all were kind of confused because you thought your dad's dead, and these letters kind of opened your eyes to the fact that he may be alive. Is that correct, or?
Yeah, it was really strange. Let's see, Roots came out in 83.
I'm thinking it come out in late 70s.
Late 70s,
78,
like that,
79, somewhere around
And
there.
of course, at that point right there, I didn't know Dad was alive.
Yeah.
Nobody did. He was dead so far as I
Right,
was concerned and
right.
all that. So Janice wanted to find out where Dad was buried.
Right.
So we got a hold of the consulate in Germany, and of course what had happened to begin with, Mom had passed away in 1981. So she had passed, and I went through her belongings, and we found this box with addresses and just letters that she had gotten since she's been here
Right.
that I didn't know anything about. And so we started to narrow it down to Niederreblingen in East Germany. It was occupied by the Russians at the time,
Right.
of course. And so back then you communicated with telegrams. And so it took a little bit of time to go back and forth. And so there was this preacher that went around preaching at different little churches and all this stuff. And Niederreblingen is a small town that's really close to Songerhausen. That's the bigger city, about 6 miles away, or 3 or whatever it was. Well, finally we got a telegram from the consulate saying that this preacher, found somebody in Niederreblingen by the name of Jentzsch. Do we want to hear from him? Well, of course we want to hear from him. In fact, Janice was telling me about this. It took me completely by surprise when the telegram came in. Well, so we corresponded saying, yes, we want to communicate with him, to send some letters or some evidence that he is really my biological father and all that. Well, that finally happened, and that was really a surprise that that's who it was. Well, while we were communicating with letters, we took a little while, and I got some photographs, and some pictures too, that he kept during captivity. The one that he held me when I was about 6, 7 months old or so,
Right.
in
Yeah.
his uniform.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. That, and plus the letter that I sent him,
Right.
because I went through almost 2 years of school there. It was printed.
Right.
I sent that letter to the front, and I still
Right.
got that letter too.
Yeah.
That he
Yeah.
kept, and he kept those 2 items while he was in captivity, by the way. And had he been caught with them, it would have been something else, but he hid it. Yeah. Okay. So we got to the part that where we got these letters going back and forth, and so finally I got to the point where I had gotten 2 phone numbers in this village. That phone number, one of them was to the firehouse, and the other one was to the police. And of course, the people, my dad, they had the farm there and everything, they didn't have phones. So what I had to do, I had to call that phone number, which was the firehouse that was closest to his farm. And so I left a message telling him to come. So I waited a half an hour later to give him time to get down to the fire hall, and I called back. And so I got to talk to him.
To your dad.
To my biological father.
Yeah.
I got to talk to him, and of course he told me different things, and I did too.
Didn't the preacher that y'all first talked to, when y'all asked if they knew your father's name was Fritz, right? Fritz Jentzsch.
Yeah.
Did they know? Did y'all ask if y'all knew where the grave was, or did you know if he was alive? And the preacher said, yeah, he's in my congregation. Didn't he say that?
Well, he said, yeah, Fritz is well and alive, and of course he's been there farming.
Right.
It was occupied, a Russian occupation there.
Right.
It was still there. And so we went from there to communicate, and I finally got him to come over here to this country.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was all in the newspaper, local newspaper.
Yeah. And so he came over. Well, he told his friends that, we found each other, and that he was coming to the States. And they said, wow, you're going to fly all the way to the States?
Yeah.
And he said, why not? He said, I went through Belgium, I went through France, Poland, and Russia, and back. I walked most of the time.
Yeah.
I'm going to fly to America, like that. So he came over. And when he got to the airport, he recognized me first. And I didn't recognize him, but he had a hat on and stuff like that. And when I saw him, I want you to know, I never knew the man, didn't remember his face or anything. And there was just some kind of electricity going on. Now, something was happening, like this, just like.
Did you get emotional, or?
I got emotional to a good friend I didn't know.
Right, right.
That kind of thing.
I mean, you didn't cry or anything like that?
No, nothing like that, because, I didn't know. It's just but there was something going on there.
Yeah, there was chemistry there.
Yeah, the chemistry was going on. And but time stood still for him, because he called me. In other words, he talked baby talk with me. Like I was still a little kid.
Like you were still
like I was still little.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he got out of that eventually,
Right.
but he sang songs with me that we used to sing and all this stuff.
Yeah,
And all this came back to me, too, see?
Yeah.
And but it was emotional to a degree. Of course, we had him over here 3 or 4 weeks, and he really enjoyed it, and we showed him everything that we have here.
Yeah.
Kroger's and everything was wrapped and all this, and he couldn't understand it, because over there they didn't see stuff like it in the stores.
Yeah.
Farmers were different. They had their own meat. But if you got something wrapped, it was in newspapers.
Yeah.
And then that's how you took it home, like that.
Well, now he went back, and then he came back. Then y'all went over there later, right?
Yeah, we went back later.
How many years after he got here?
Yeah, I went over there, and come to find out, actually, when he thought that we were killed in the attack, we didn't get killed, and we knew through the letter that he was dead.
Yeah.
Well, which he wasn't dead. So things were just going back and forth. And what my dad did, he married the woman that he dated while he was dating my mom.
Oh, okay.
And so they had 2 sons, Klaus and Manfred. They're, of course, a little younger than I am, but they're getting up there, too. And so I have now two half brothers, so to speak, and they've got their farm back. Because
Did you get to meet them when you were over there?
We got to meet them. I took Janice, our 3 kids, and this lawyer friend of mine, Monty Curry.
Yeah.
We went over there, and we lived with them for all these times, and it was really interesting. And of course, when we got there, we were the first Americans since the end of the war.
Now, y'all went over there while the communists were still in power, right?
Oh yeah, this was like in the early 80s.
How did that affect you when you went over there?
Well, it was really strange.
Yeah.
To begin with, we had to take a train
Right.
at the border, and of course they have no man's land. They had the towers. They had narrow.
They still had
walkways.
the Berlin the wall up, right?
Well, the wall was up, and then when the crossing we had, they didn't have the wall. They had great big old gates, fences, and stuff, and towers, and they had minefields and all this stuff, and roads.
Yeah.
And they had a little bitty shed where the Western train had a diesel engine.
Right.
And we went into this compound, and the diesel engine disconnected, and the East Germans connected their locomotive, which was
Right.
a steam locomotive,
Right.
and on the side of it, of course, the Russians didn't like the Germans anyway, but it had Deutsche Reichsbahn on that. That's what
Yeah.
Hitler's a train was,
Right, yeah.
Deutsche Reichsbahn like
Yeah.
that. While we were staying there, and you could get off the train, go to this little snack bar and get stuff, but we didn't have time. Everything is punctual over there, even in the East, when it comes
Right.
to trains.
Right.
And so while that was going on, they went through all your luggage. The windows would open up only halfway. You couldn't
Yeah.
open the window up all the way because you can get out. So they
Yeah.
just had them open halfway, and you couldn't get out the windows.
Yeah.
You couldn't bring any literature in. They checked for that.
Right.
And the guy came around. He stamped your passport, and he had a little platform in front of him, a piece
Right.
of wood with chains on them or hung around his neck.
Well.
And it cost us that day, I think it was $5 a day at that time. They had a special on
Yeah.
kits for half and all that stuff. And
Right.
that was per day that we stayed over
Right.
there. So we went in there and we had to check in once the train left. Well, it stopped at this one place. And it stopped at several because it was kind of a train that stopped and go, like
Right.
a mail train like
Right.
that. And that's the only thing that we could get. And we saw where we stopped Russian soldiers. Like one uniform fits all. And we
Right.
spoke English, and they didn't know what we were talking about and
Right.
stuff like that. This was in the
Right.
East now, you know.
Right.
They had 4 people. Now, they also had a place where you could candy bars.
Yeah.
And we went in there, and I asked, the kids were hungry a little bit, and so I got them all candy bars. And I had about 4 or 5 different brands that I
Right.
bought.
Right.
And she came back with a handful of candy bars, but they were all one brand.
Oh.
So they advertised all those bars, but they only had one actually for sale.
Oh wow.
And then not only that, they had a problem with the train that was coming in. The wait to get on ours to go
Right.
where we were going, they had 4 guys sitting around this hole, and they have cobblestones
Yeah.
over there. And to look at the East, if you've never been there, everything is drab. Everything's
Yeah.
the same thing.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it's a different
Yeah.
world. It's terrible looking, you
Yeah.
know. And so they were sitting there, and they had their tools with them, and the cobblestones are set in sand. And so 1 or 2 of them, they were raking the sand up, and the sand would roll back in the hole. They kept that up
Wow.
until for about an hour or so before that train showed up,
Yeah.
and they never did get any stones put in. And I see that goes to show you what socialism is.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they get paid
there's
just
no
so much.
incentive. Yeah.
That's right,
Yeah.
no incentive. Even socialized medicine, you know, the doctors.
Yeah. Well, we probably need to wrap this up, but I wanted to, before we move on, I wanted to say now you, want to understand, you had thought you had forgotten German, okay, and then you realized when you got over there that you could speak German, right?
Yeah, and that's a crazy thing because I went over there by myself at the time. That's when my dad passed.
Right. Right.
But I couldn't be there for the funeral, but I
Right.
went there to see.
Right.
And I stayed by myself about a week or so,
Right.
and I flew Lufthansa. And
Right.
of course, I knew a little bit of German then, but I had forgotten it all.
Right.
I wasn't that good at it.
Right.
But I stayed with them all this time, speaking nothing but German. So when I came back, of course, I spoke German with the attendants on the airplane.
Right.
I ate their food and stuff, and
Right.
well, they could tell
Where you were from.
where I was from and all that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got home, and Jan was supposed to pick me up. I don't know what happened, but I called
Yeah.
away into Murfreesboro. I was laying on the couch, and they came in. They missed me. It's about 2 a.m, and they woke me up and said, "Hey, Pete, what is it?" And they talked to me in English, and I looked up at them, and I spoke to them in German. I couldn't speak English. I forgot my English for 2 days. couldn't communicate with them. I mean,
Wow.
I had a hard time.
Wow.
So you never forget anything.
Yeah.
It's back there someplace.
It's back there.
And
yeah.
it just takes the practice, and it came out.
Right.
And
Right.
your accent, and the region I was from, all that,
Right.
they could tell. And even when I talked to the help on the airplane,
Right.
the stewardess and stuff like
Right.
that, they thought I was German.
Well, in conclusion here, I want to ask you a few things, kind of bring it up to today. I hear this all the time, and it really irritates me when I hear this because I hear Trump compared to Hitler, and I hear even any American president, whether he be Obama, or whether he be Ronald Reagan, or Clinton, Bill Clinton, when I hear an American compared to Hitler, it infuriates me because I know a little bit about history. Okay, how do you relate to that when somebody calls Trump Hitler? You know.
Well, they're either ignorant, nothing is free, we know
Yeah.
that, and socialism don't work, we know that too, right?
Right.
Now,
right.
them calling Trump Hitler, they don't know. Now, I say this for Hitler. Now, he
Right.
did bring Germany out of the depression.
Right.
He promised
Now,
them
if
that
he'd stopped there and not went into the killing of the Jews and causing World War II, ended up killing 60 million people, Hitler might have went down in history as one of the greatest heroes of in German history. Because he brought the unemployment figure was like 30% when he came to power, and it went down to 2%. And he helped bring about the Volkswagen automobile and the interstate highway system. That's the reason they call the interstate highway system in America the Eisenhower system, because Eisenhower got the idea from Germany. So even a stop clock is right twice a day. But I just, for someone who lived under Hitler, and of course I know you were young, but I just wanted to see your reaction.
Well, my reaction is this: when we came over here, I didn't speak English.
Right.
Mom said, "No more German," because
Right.
we're in a new place, a new beginning,
Right.
and we're going to be Americans. That's
Right.
what she said. So I forgot my German. That's why I forgot it.
Yeah. And somebody like you, to me, is one of the best patriots, because you know what it is to live in a situation like Hitler. You've seen communism by going back over there and actually being in a communist state. Doesn't it terrify you to think that we have people in a major political party today that are advocating socialism?
They need to think. Well, number one, they need to teach civics, for one.
Right.
They need to make people aware of what they've got and what they're trying to give away. People are coming in here. God bless the wall, because
Right.
it keeps most of them out, but they come
Right.
over here to get what we have.
Yeah.
And we're trying to throw it
to
away.
take rather than to give.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so anyway, she told us, you're an American now, and this is what it is, and we enjoy this life. I have benefited. Of course, went in the military. We took an oath.
Right.
And I'll fight to this day to defend this country. I really
Right.
will, because this is
Right.
my country.
Right.
And for somebody to compare Trump to Hitler, they got a lot to learn.
Right.
And what I say to them is, if they feel this way, just go to some of these socialistic countries and
Right.
stay for a week.
Right.
And if you want to come back, they won't let you come back and see what that feels like,
Right,
like
right.
that. But it's really absurd, because socialism, like when I was in the East after
Right.
the war, even
Right.
my dad passed away just before the wall fell in '89. He passed away Christmas Eve.
Of
And I-
'89.
Yeah, and I got the letter a lot later,
Right.
from that. And he hated the Russians. In fact, he was a patriot to Germany,
Right.
not Hitler
Right.
or socialism, nothing
Right.
like that. But he just stood up for him and everybody else like that. He passed away, had a heart attack. Well, they have socialized medicine over there. Well, guess what? The doctors get paid what the state tells them they should get paid.
Mm-hmm.
They put them in jobs or situations or hospitals where they don't want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And then to help, they haven't got anything to work for, because they just get a certain amount. So they're
There's
not
no
gonna be-
motivation.
Yeah, no motivation there. And so my dad, when he had the heart attack, had he had care at the time, he would have survived.
Mm-hmm.
And so he died at an early age
Yeah.
compared to what we do now.
How old was he when he died?
Well, he must have been about 74, 75, something like that, which is
Wow.
good for what he went through.
Considering, yeah.
And Mom, she was about
Yeah.
63. Of course, the war got her, and she
Right.
was completely gray at age 30.
Wow. Your mom died at 63?
63 or 64.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
She
Wow.
died in 81.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, Pete, I really appreciate you, sharing with us your life and all that's happened. Like I said, I would love to see. I think this could be a movie. I really do. Considering what you went through and what your dad went through and how y'all were reunited. To me, this is a great story. A great American story.
Yeah.
And,
well, there's a lot more to it that we couldn't get into and all this stuff,
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
in-betweens,
right.
the regular lifestyle and stuff like that.
Right.
But I appreciate you having me and give you some insight on that.
Well, I enjoyed it, and so this is a good way to kick off our podcast. So again, I want to thank you for doing this and sharing your time with us. So yeah, I want to thank the listeners, and we hope to continue providing interviews like this. I feel like everybody's got a story to tell, and this has been one of them. Also, we hope to get into interpretation of history. I like to talk politics, history, and social subjects involving sociology, that type thing. And we want to intertwine these subjects with a historical perspective. So again, I want to say that I appreciate the listeners and the time they've devoted to this program.